Are we supposed to just?
Yeah, no, we're on. Okay, now we're on. Sorry, we were waiting for the mics. Hi, everyone. How's it going? Day 2, right? So throughout this podcast festival, we've been learning how to pitch, produce, and package podcasts. But today we're going to learn how to make $1 or $2 off of it, or in this case, $1 million. My name is Mandana Mofidi. I'm the executive director of Fusion Media Group, and I'm joined here by 2 powerhouse women, Danielle Dana, executive director of Science Friday, and Jenna Weiss-Berman, co-founder of Pineapple Street Media. So it's really interesting that they paired us all 3 together. We 3 come from very different media organizations and have different revenue structures set up. So I think in an effort to help you understand kind of how we work and how we make our money, we'll just each give a little tidbit about our organization. I'll go first. Fusion Media Group is home to brands like The Onion, The AV Club, Jezebel, Dead Cask, Gizmodo, The Root. And one of our jobs is to basically use and leverage the audience of those brands and create audio content from that. Yeah, that's us.
Oh yeah, we have
a slide clicker. We get a lot of our revenue from CPMs, sponsored content, branded content, and recently grants. But I'll kick it over to Danielle, who can tell us more about Science Friday.
Hey, I'm Danielle from Science Friday. Goodness, let's see. What we're known for is, you guessed it, Science Friday. Science Friday is predominantly a public radio program, although it does have a podcast as well. And within this last year, we also launched our first podcast endeavor outside of Science Friday called Undiscovered. I think we've got the host somewhere here in the audience. We get our revenue from lots of different sources. So because we are predominantly a radio program, we have CPMs and advertising coming from the radio show. We have underwriters, sponsors, foundations. We're a nonprofit, so we have individual giving as well. And then we also have CPMs and kind of earned revenue for the podcast as well. So we also do events and see some earned revenue in that area.
I should just say something about my company, okay? I'm Jenna. My company is Pineapple Street Media. We launched about a little less than a year and a half ago, and it's been kind of a wild ride because everybody wants a podcast right now, if you may know that. And we have done a bunch of shows. We do still processing for the New York Times. We do Janet Mock's show. We do Lena Dunham's show. We did a podcast with Hillary Clinton on her campaign. We did Missing Richard Simmons, a controversial show yes. that I actually think didn't violate any ethics, but we could talk about that another time. We make money in a bunch of ways that I'm gonna tell you guys about, because I think that people don't talk about money enough in this business, especially women. And I think that talking about money and like actual numbers is extremely important, especially among women. So I hope that we can help you guys a little make money on your podcasts.
Awesome. That's awesome. Now, I know we have some audio clips too.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of give people an idea as to like how we turned what was our bread and butter, which is science and reporting on science and science news, into 2 separate things. So right now we have Science Friday. It's a public radio program. It's basically Ira Flato, you may or may not be familiar. He's a veteran NPR and radio correspondent, interviewing people in a live setting. And we have kind of an audio clip here.
So are the rocks just sitting out there on the ground?
They are just waiting for us to come and find them. If you can imagine that blue ice that you saw back when you were in Antarctica, and then you just look and there's some dark spots on them, and those are rocks, and frequently those rocks are from space.
And next we have the clip from Undiscovered, which is 2 female hosts, both talking about science, but in a narrative format. The interesting thing about this audio clip is actually the same woman talking about the same thing, but you'll see it's edited differently. Yeah, we can just play that.
Out here in the middle of Antarctica, even the ice is alien. It's blue. These ice sheets, they're so old. This ice is so compressed, it reflects back blue light.
So I can't really do justice to this color. It's something I'd never seen in my life before. It is almost the same color as the sky. And so on a beautiful cloudless day, sometimes it's really hard to tell the difference between where the ice ends and the sky begins.
And there you have it.
Awesome. So these women are here today because they have clocked in $1 million for their respected podcasts, and we're going to be here to talk about that. Jenna, you very openly have said that you love talking about money. So why don't we kick it off to you first with some of the podcasts that have clocked in $1 million and sharing with us the nitty-gritty on how you did it.
To be clear, I'm not like making millions of dollars all the time on shows. But I wanted to give you guys like a couple of sort of case studies on 2 different podcasts and like the revenue potential and then the actual revenue. I feel like standing up, but maybe that's not, no, it's probably not a good idea. They'll kill me if I pull this mic off of here, but I am going to raise it a little. Posture, confidence. Let's see. So we started our business, basically like what Pineapple does is we do a lot of partnerships with interesting people to make shows. And we get paid either like a production fee from the companies we're working with, or sometimes we will own part of a show. There are a lot of different ways we make money, but the way that we launched our company was we were very conservative. We didn't start a company until we knew that we had a few shows lined up and ready to go that needed production. So we were approached by the New York Times. We were approached by Lena Dunham, who I'd done a show with at BuzzFeed, and she wanted to take it independent. And then we were also approached by some brands. So we were kind of like, okay, let's just try this thing. So a major celebrity, whose name I accidentally just mentioned, was our first show. I was going to try to do this anonymously. Oh, and a thing I would love to say, actually, is that I'm all for like people tweeting things, but I want to like be able to talk kind of candidly about numbers here, and I would really appreciate it if you didn't like tweet the exact amounts I'm telling you about. Cool. Are we That's like.
Does that mean okay?
Cool. That's like
okay. Awesome. Good.
Okay. Great. So with this major celebrity-hosted show, we made money on that in 4 different ways. We tried to find the ads on that. My company, my business partner, and I. It was actually just the 2 of us at the time, so I was producing the show, and he was looking for money for it. We did something called a presenting sponsorship. That was a thing that we feel like we sort of made up, although I feel like other people have probably done it too, which is it's like a mention of a company in every episode. It's just kind of like a baked in, like maybe 10-second thing, thinking, in this case, it was MailChimp. And Lena, this celebrity...
You're bad at this.
I'm just I tell you, like, I get in trouble all the time for speaking too openly about this stuff. So just don't tweet it and we'll be fine. My business partner is mostly the one who gets mad at me. But yeah, so she had about 500,000 listeners to her first season, each episode, which is really good for a podcast. And so we sold a presenting sponsorship. We sold it for $300,000 for 10 episodes. So $30,000 an episode. Then we also worked with her agency to find some ads. So her talent agency found us. They also represented people from TBS, and we did a bunch of ads for Search Party in its first season, where Lena talked to people on the show, and it was like these kind of 2-minute, very like produced interviews that we did as ads. So that was the second way we made money, and we made about $350,000 on that for three episodes. Then we did, we were pitched, we talked to Clinique, and they wanted to do a show with us, and they wanted to do a branded show, and we sort of sold them on the idea of like, look, it's hard, we make branded shows, but it's not an easy thing to get people to listen to your branded podcast. So what if we had Lena Dunham host a full episode that was sponsored, which I hadn't heard done before. Maybe it's been done, but it was kind of this like weird idea that, at first we were nervous about even presenting it to her, but it ended up being her interviewing like 3 interesting actors about their like activism, and then it was all related back to Clinique. So we sold like a full episode for $200,000, and then we had additional ads at about a $50 CPM. Do you guys know does anyone not know what CPM is? Yeah, I didn't either. A CPM is, it's cost per, is it milli? Yeah, so it's like cost per 1,000 listens. And so when you're selling a podcast, it's something that you will have to like talk about a lot and have to like really know your shit on, because most podcasts are sold based on how many listeners they have. So you can, you might say like $50 for one pre-roll, and then if you have 10,000 listeners, that's, I'm not going to do the math right now, but $5,000.
And your CPM rate will, I think, change as you kind of get more listeners and as your advertising becomes kind of more valuable because there's less of it.
Yeah, totally. So this, I won't say the exact amount, but this show made a little over $1 million on 10 episodes, and we split it 50-50 with Lena, and that's how we started our company. So we didn't want to take venture capital. That was a big part of our company, and so that was kind of our seed money. And that's like a very rare, that's not an amount of money you make on a lot of shows. It was like very rare, and we knew that we could start a business doing this. So a lot of thought was given to that, but I don't ever expect to make that much money on something again. So that was one show that did make over $1 million, and then we could go to the next. So Missing Richard Simmons was one that should have made over $1 million based on the CPMs alone. It was one of the most listened to podcasts ever. It had 2 million listeners an episode. Now it's more than that. We did 6 episodes. So if you sold 4 ads at $25 CPM, you should be making about $200,000 an episode when you have 2 million listeners. And that was sort of a perfect storm of like, we were a new company. We were working with a company that was just starting to do podcasts. We had a third company come in kind of at the last minute to try to make the money, and we didn't make the money. Luckily, my company was just paid a production fee for those, so it didn't matter that much to us if it didn't make money. But that's the kind of thing that now that we know what happened there, we would change certain things in the future. So those are 2 examples, and I'm glad that you now know what a CPM is, because you'll want to know that.
And
that's a really good question. Is it like
cost
a
per
milli?
1,000 makes, yeah.
Yeah, you're...
There you go.
Cool. You should have named it, though. That's a better idea. Yeah.
Danielle, now you have a different business structure set up. Science Friday is a nonprofit. You guys make your money through donations, sponsors. Talk about a little bit about how you guys make your money in terms of CPMs as well, or CPTs.
Sure. Actually, it's interesting to kind of hear you talk about kind of that presenting sponsor, because for the nonprofit, we have a lot of foundation relationships existing. So what I did with Undiscovered was I actually approached a couple of foundations that we had existing relationships with and asked them if they wanted to be a founding sponsor of the podcast. So in that way, and I know that some of the other sessions here today have talked about that a little bit, use the existing relationships that you have to kind of see whether or not you can get some seed funding. That kind of helped us get off the ground. A lot of podcasts are in a deficit after year 1, so this kind of helped us get off the ground. We didn't really have to worry about money so much for season 1. Season 2 is obviously then a different story. You kind of have to make sure that your expenses are lining up with the income that you're generating. But we're getting CPMs. I think we have a very modest rate. It's probably average for podcasts. We have, I think it's $25. Once again, don't tweet any of this stuff out because we're always hoping for more. So it's $25 CPM for Undiscovered right now. And we expect in season 2, because we already have a base of 100,000 listeners, that will increase. So.
How do you guys negotiate your CPMs? Is it based on the success of previous shows, or is it kind of like where you are in terms of the market? Because as women, we usually set the market value, and I'm curious how you guys both do that.
We talked a little bit about this. I think, in my opinion, it's constantly changing. So there are groups. Midroll is one of them. It's one of the ones that's been mentioned a lot here, that kind of help determine CPM, and they probably base that on audience. I think your podcast can be deemed more valuable depending on partnerships that you have and whether or not you have marketing channels kind of already in place, like an existing podcast where you can do some promotion. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think with CPMs, you base how much an ad costs partially on how many people might be like clamoring to buy the ads on that show. So, and then I think sometimes you add a premium, like if Lena Dunham's gonna be like promoting your product, like I know people have all sorts of opinions about her, but it should be like, you know, it's extra valuable if you have like a major celebrity with like 5 million Twitter followers as the person who's voicing an ad. So in that case, you might, you know, we did some that were $200 CPMs, which is like pretty wild, but that's kind of what people will pay to have this kind of like major influencer talk about them.
And how much is the finance tied in both of your respective fields to producing the content? Like, are you risk adverse, or is it all tied to finance? Like, how much of it is kind of a dance between the two? Great content, but also making sure that it, you know, keeps the lights on.
Yeah, I mean, I think, gosh, first-year podcasts are a risk.
Yeah.
Just, it is what it is. But I think the way that we work is kind of under constant evaluation. So it's not evaluating at the end of a season to see whether or not it's successful. It's every episode. Who is listening? Are we increasing organically? Are you seeing that kind of growth? Where are we with expenses? Is it this episode cost more than the other one because it was in production for longer or required more travel, or because it didn't get advertising? It's day by day, I guess.
For sure. Monitoring it,
Yeah.
keeping it
Yeah. We do a lot of branded stuff, and part of our view with that stuff is that, although less and less, but our thing with that is that if we can get a certain kind of podcast that really pays the bills, then we can take more risks. So, you know, the reason that we could do like a Janet Mock show in a first season, or we do a lot of pro bono work. So we do a lot of work with kind of like leftist organizations. So we just did like a pilot with Daily Action, which is a cool like resistance organization. I do this show, Making Gay History, and I do that for free. I just like record them and edit them every week. So when we're going into things, we're thinking like, you know, how much is this going to pay, and what else can it fund that is going to pay less, basically, which has been, it feels good to me because it means that like if I'm working with, you know, I don't work with super controversial brands, but like if I'm working with a controversial brand on something, I like to think of it as like, well, I'm also like, you know, maybe gonna help the ACLU launch their podcast with that money. So, yeah, that's about it.
Speaking of controversy brands, I mean, is there anyone that you wouldn't accept money from? And if so, why?
For us, that's a definite yes. Science Friday was founded predominantly as like a news program, so and we kind of kept that mentality with Undiscovered. So anything that's going to impact our integrity as a show, so anybody that is trying to influence content, it's a no-go for us.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people we wouldn't want to take money from, and we wouldn't take money from them. And an interesting thing is that when we were starting out, we were thinking about venture capital. It's like a crazy time for podcasts, obviously, and I think Gimlet has really opened the door for venture capitalists to be like extremely excited about podcast companies. So we talked to a few places, and we decided against it because we really like the idea of like having full control over our shows and not having to, become a $100 million company to like make a venture capitalist rich. But when we were talking, one of the questions that somebody asked in one of these venture firms was like, they were like, we know you guys are doing this Hillary Clinton show. What we want to know is that you would do a Donald Trump show if it paid enough money. And we like didn't answer them in the meeting. We're like, whoa, that's so, but like their whole thing was kind of like, you do what makes the most money. And if that's what's going to make the most money, you do it. And that was really like, that was like a turning point for us in being like, oh yeah, we don't want to take venture capital money because we never want to have to like compromise our values that hardcore. The answer is we'll never do a Donald Trump show, no matter how much money it pays. I hope that's obvious. No, you shouldn't even clap. Like if I like was gonna do that, I'd be the worst asshole in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we touched on both earlier is like presenting sponsorship or founding sponsorship. Undiscovered is planning a different model for this next year. So one of the things that we've been looking at in terms of like making deals is not looking at the season as a whole, but also episode by episode. It kind of helps you break things down a little bit more if you have an episode that you think is going to appeal to a certain funder or is going to appeal to a certain advertiser. That's kind of, it's an opportunity that you should take.
Both of you wear many hats in your organization, editing with the actual content, leveraging the talent, figuring out new story ideas. I'm wondering, how much time do you actually spend fundraising and focus on the money portion of the business?
Thankfully, I never edit. That's probably good for everybody here. But gosh, I think I'm always fundraising, and I think we talked about this like a little bit earlier. I think if you are involved in a podcast, a product, anything, you are always an advocate for that product. You are always out there talking about it, selling it in one way or another. The difference is I'm probably asking people for money half the time to support it, but I think that I'm kind of always fundraising in some capacity or another.
Yeah, I'm not always the one who's like, talking exact numbers from the beginning, but it's been kind of fun starting a business because I was like a podcast producer for 10 years or a little bit more, and I didn't realize how interested I would be in the money side of things. And then I've gotten like really probably too obsessed with it, where I have like just like crazy spreadsheets and like projections, and so it's probably like 30% of my time right now is thinking about like where the money's coming from and how to bring it in.
And only recently have podcasts started really making money. Like I know we talked about it earlier, maybe Serial was kind of the one that put it on the map. I'm curious for those of the people out here that maybe are just starting or have a podcast that's not making money, but they want to figure out ways to make money, what your advice is to them.
Go for it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important not to be discouraged if you have like an independent podcast and you want to make some money off of it. It takes a while to build an audience and to build a following, and it takes a lot of confidence, I think, to try to really like talk to somebody and tell them why they should give you money. But I think what's cool about podcasts is that you can target pretty niche audiences. And so if I have like a knitting podcast, maybe it has 5,000 listeners or 2,000 listeners, but maybe I can go to my like local yarn store and say like, thank you. Yeah. So like go to your local yarn store and be like, hey, I have this podcast. It's like the only podcast about knitting. And like you can sponsor it for just like, $200 a show. And like everyone will hear this and, get a promo code set up. And the return, the ROIs, or like the returns for these are really, like for podcasts, are very high. Like I saw Mark Maron's producer speak once, and he said that about 80% of their listeners have like actually gone and bought one of the products that Mark Maron is talking about, which is like, that's why these CPMs are getting higher, because if you're just looking at like an internet ad I just said internet ad. If you're just like, sorry, if you're like looking at something on the internet, you'll probably scroll right by it. But if you're like listening to a host that you like love and trust talk about a product, it actually is really helpful. So if you have 2,000 listeners and 50 of them go buy yarn at that store, it's been very valuable for that store. So I think you can really start small and talk to different places about sponsoring your show.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that there is an audience for probably everybody's idea here, whether it's like, a 2 million person audience, that's, I think, to be determined. But you can find people to listen to what your ideas are if the content is well produced and if you're marketing right. So don't be afraid of partnering, whether that be partnering with a store to kind of help them reach your audience through advertising, or whether that be through events, or you just want to kind of explore lots of different options to kind of increase your audience and find those groups of people. And then from there, assuming that you're not like, eating toast every day, I think you should be evaluating your expenses. So if in year one you decide to spend a lot of money on art, maybe if you do a survey with your audience end of year and determine that they didn't really notice that you spent a lot on art, then you cut that the next year. So I think that you need to be kind of under constant evaluation to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. And eventually you'll kind of find that happy medium where you're making money.
Yeah, it's a dance, right, between the passion project and also bringing in the money.
Right.
Yeah.
I know I mentioned this, but I went to this talk with Puff Daddy, and he was talking about it's very interesting. I'll get to it, but he walked away from a multi-million-dollar deal, like in the 40s, 40 million, because it was $2 million short of where he wanted it to be. And I'm wondering, as women start making podcasts and we're in this world, and have you guys ever walked away from a deal that maybe was a few $1,000s short from where you needed to be, or do we not have that luxury yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do. I mean, I just walked away from one like a few months ago because, I mean, I can go back to them if I want to, as far as I'm concerned. We'll see what they say. But like, I wanted to explore what else was out there. So I think not always taking the first offer you get is sound advice.
Yeah, and I know we're talking a lot about ads, but production services is a lot of what my company does. And just for you all to know, this is a crazy fucking time for podcasts, and everybody needs a producer right now, and you should never take less money than you feel comfortable taking. Like, never, especially, like, don't do stuff for free. Like, I mean, I don't know, I shouldn't say that because I did a couple things for free a while back, but this is if you're a podcast producer and if you know how to cut tape and, put it together and edit, this is an incredibly valuable skill set right now. Like, we're desperately looking for like great like senior producers, and so are all these other companies.
We're often competing for the same people.
Oh my God, yeah. And it's like competing so that we're like, okay, we'll give you 5,000 more, and then they come back. It's like it's a crazy time. So you should know how valuable your skill set is if you can do these things, and you should know what a good time this is to get into this. And never let anybody pay you less than what you think you're worth.
Jenna, are you hiring?
Yes, we are definitely hiring. We're growing quickly, and I think it's a fun place to work. So talk to me if you're interested.
I want to leave time for questions as well, so if you guys have some, but let's get to this portion of it. What is success to you? Is it that $1 million podcast? Is it the listenership? Is it having enough seed money to create other projects? What does that mean for each of you in these different realms?
I mean, Science Friday, I think Jenna would probably say the same thing, but we're mission driven. So kind of meeting our goals in terms of making science more accessible is our primary goal. As long as we are not losing money, I think we're successful. So
yeah, I mean, success for me is really mostly about my like dream is that people hear something that I worked on and are like, oh, that's a good show. Like, I really liked that. That is like really what like always keeps me going. Money is really important too. I mean, I have a kid who was born a month after I started this business, and I knew that I had to be making more money than I was at my previous job. And so that's definitely a part of success. And I think, like, you know, if we're telling ourselves that, like, all we care about is, like, you know, an important mission and making good work, I think we're kind of lying to ourselves. And that, you know, having money is not something to be afraid of. It's fun.
Yeah, let's clap for that. Yeah, so I mean, I do want to, I know that there's a lot of questions that you guys might have. Do you feel ready to take some audience questions?
Yeah, bring it on.
Yeah,
Let's do it. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for this great panel. My name is Nisi Panetta, and we have a small team getting ready to launch a podcast about the 2018 midterm elections.
I emailed you back, I think, the other day.
So we're planning to launch on election day, and it's called the Mid-Pod. So you can sign up and be on our mailing list if you want. But I have two burning questions. One is about the promo codes and whether you can negotiate up front to make sure you get the essentially click-through data and conversion data with advertisers. Do they typically share that data back to you as a podcast? And the second one has to do with what kind of ROIs you see in terms of promoting a podcast with advertising on other podcasts or elsewhere.
You want to hit the first one? I'll get the second.
Okay. Okay, the first one. Now I have the second one.
Promo codes, do you get the data
Yeah.
on who actually activated the promo
Yeah,
codes?
I mean, the way that we've gotten that data on who actually, goes and buys the product is that we just ask them. So if we're working directly with a company, like sometimes we'll work directly with like, who have we worked directly with? I guess not that many places, but a lot of time you're working with like a mid-roll, which is an intermediary, or they'll go and sell your ads for you. And you can always ask them, how well did this do? Like, how many Casper mattresses did we sell? And sometimes they'll tell you, because if they're not happy about it, they'll come to you and like ask if it can be on extra shows for free. So yeah, just ask. And then...
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like promo swaps, we found them immensely helpful for Undiscovered. So my advice to you is to evaluate. Not all are created equal, and the ones that you think might be the best promo swaps might turn out not to be. So we did a mixed bag of promo swaps. We took a survey at the end of the year to find out where people had heard us. And it was very surprising. The places where we weren't expecting much of a bump, we actually got a huge bump, but that helps us make determinations for seasons in the future and where to place our promo swaps.
Yeah, and this is kind of related to money too, is how to get people to listen to your podcast, which is like the eternal question. And promo swaps, meaning that like you promote a show on your show and that show promotes your show on their show. Those are really successful. The like only way of getting people to listen to your show is by either promoting it on other shows or having your host on as like a guest on another show. I mean, I used to work at BuzzFeed, and we would write a whole article about another round, and BuzzFeed is a huge site, but no one would hear another round until they had like either heard about it on another show or like it was a word of mouth kind of thing. So that stuff is really important in growing your audience.
Yeah, I mean, think really hard about what your average listener looks like. Like, I mean, honestly, what they look like and what they are probably listening to, and start there in terms of where you would want to do some promo swaps.
Let's take one from this side.
Hello.
That works.
Hello, my name is Florencia. I'm from South America. I was born in Uruguay. I'm living now in Argentina. And in our countries, podcasters work for free. And I would like to know, is reality, our reality, I would like to know which is your advice in order to convince our companies to invest in our podcast.
Can I ask what company you work for?
No.
Are there companies to invest
So
in?
you're asking how to kind of change the model for...
I'm asking, can I convince a company in Argentina, for example, in order to invest in my podcast? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why you couldn't convince
Especially if it's in Spanish, because that's the new realm.
Sure.
Yes, but in our countries, companies doesn't know who is a podcast, for example. You understand me?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not super familiar with like the South American like podcast market. I think it's terrible if the market is that you work for free, because I can't imagine that is the case for other media in South America. So, I mean, maybe if you're looking for examples, try to use the American podcast market as an example for why companies in South America should start investing in a podcast network in South America.
Okay, thank you.
Over here.
Hi.
Hey.
So I pretty much understand what she was saying. I'm from Kenya as well, and the podcasting community on that side of the world is also very small. So trying to get people to put money in it is quite. It's just going to take a lot more of convincing because podcasts aren't very popular. So the podcast that I run, which is called The Spread, what we with regards to, you were talking about listeners, we currently sell, when we're selling to people who are interested in advertising, we sell based off of the number of listens that we've received. We've been running for 1.5 years. We sell it per the number of listeners that we've had for the last 1.5 years, because it's, and I'm trying to figure out if what you're doing is basing it per episode, and so it's a 3-part question. If the listeners are per episode in order to sell to an advertiser or to a sponsor. Secondly, if the subscribers have anything to do with the number of listeners, because sometimes people don't really subscribe to podcasts on SoundCloud. You have more listeners than you do subscribers. And thirdly, how to be able to sell advertising segments at different parts of the podcast based off of like where people fall off, if there's a way to get the analytics for that. Does that make sense?
It's a lot.
Yeah. Can we answer one of them just to keep it going? I don't know if there's analytics yet to see when people fall off.
It's hard. I mean, it depends what hosting service you're using, but most people still listen to their podcasts on iTunes, and a lot of them are downloaded, and once a file is downloaded, you can't see really what happens to it. So unfortunately, you can't really see where people drop off. And CPMs, we're talking about per episode. I mean, in an ideal world, you're not thinking too much about CPMs. Like if you can get a company to just, if you say like, we get a bunch of listeners and we're looking for a sponsor, and if it's not based on exactly how many thousands of listeners you have per episode, that's ideal, because then you're not always like having to worry constantly about how many listeners you have every episode. So. But yeah, we're talking about it's like the CPM is a per episode thing.
I mean, regardless of how many listeners you have per episode, what you want to see is that the subscription base is going up, whether that's by 2 or 3. That's the direction you want to be going in. Is that for every episode that you have, more people are interested in kind of episodes going forward.
Did you say you're only on SoundCloud too, or are there different platforms?
So SoundCloud is where I upload the podcast onto, and then I send the RSS feed out to like Apple and.
Oh, and subscriptions don't really matter. It's really based on like plays per episode.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Lori, and it may not be exactly this session I should ask this, but I'm an activist academic. Don't come from the world of media. I'm very interested in podcasts and have been sitting trying to learn, but could somebody there just say, what is the range of activities that a producer does in a podcast? Like, what is that role? Because if you don't interact with it daily, I'm not clear of the boundaries of that role. Yeah. So it's a very newbie question, but.
It's a good question. Yeah.
I think it depends, honestly, on the size of your operation. I think the more specialized producers are generally at larger organizations, but as we talked about here, you wear lots of different hats. Our producers do everything from story sourcing to research to scripting to editing to interviewing. That's kind of across the board.
So everything.
Yeah, ours too, and it's a lot of the technical stuff too. Mm-hmm. So. Really like assembling a story.
Hi, I'm Sharon. I have a new podcast, Do Good, Be Good. And because I have a specialized niche for my podcast, I'm trying to work with people in helping professions, like nonprofits and things like that. I was successful at going and talking to a company that does volunteer management training and getting them as a sponsor for my first season. Now I feel a lot of pressure because I didn't really know what I was doing, so I got a flat rate, and it was pretty good. And so now, I literally have 70 listeners because I'm only on my second episode and I haven't really done anything to promote or launch. So I now feel the pressure that I have a sponsor and I want to make this successful for the sponsor. And so I'm just kind of wondering how you navigate that world of trying to make this a success, not just because it's your creative project and you want it to be successful, but trying to do things that will specifically make it successful for the people who have decided to sponsor it. Does that make sense?
I mean, you're interested in sponsorship too because you want to be paid at the end of the day and you want to be able to continue this project. So I do think it's a fine line. It's really, you're going to have to do both. And the sponsor is, in all likelihood, unless it's a personal relationship, going to be interested in the numbers at the end of the season. So they're going to want to know how many people that they've been getting their brand and name in front of.
I guess, is there anything you do outside of just general promotion because you know you have a specific sponsor and you want to make sure to promote it in a way that will make it more successful to them actually getting the ROI they're hoping to get out of it?
It's really stressful when I've been in the situation where we're just not getting the listeners that we promised. And I think almost every show has been in that position at some point. It's hard. That's all I can say. It's like, I wish I could help you more, but yeah, it's scary.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Lindsay. I actually just found out that our Argentinian friend and I know each other, so that's how crazy this conference is. But I work for a publishing company, and I'm in pre-production for a podcast. And my question is kind of for Jenna. When you want to launch with would you launch with a partner, or would I launch with a partner if I could? Or should I already start creating the pilot and then pitch it to someone, a media company? What do you, in your opinion, is better to do?
So you're doing a podcast for a publishing company, did you say?
Yeah, it's a book publishing company.
And it's like about the company? Or
no, it's a little bit more niche about specific kind of books. It's not really like in production yet, so I don't want to give everything away, but yeah, we have pretty much the concept ready to go, and we're writing scripts, and we're talking to editors. We don't have anything recorded yet, but we have everything set up. But I guess my question is really more so like, if the idea is to sort of get a partner at some point to help us with reach and to help us with just resources as well, is it better to look to a media company to launch initially, or is it better to do the pilot first and then to send it to a potential partner to work with?
Yeah. I think it's good to do a pilot first and, shop it around if you want. But if you're working for a publisher that has like a good marketing and promotional wing, they should be able to market and promote this well. And they're, partnering with somebody probably won't, it probably will cost you more than what it gives you, basically. So I would consider just, trying to do it with you already have a partner in this company, and that's kind of that's already kind of a rare thing. A lot of people are just trying to do these, themselves. So
yeah, I just feel like the new thing is every time someone comes out with a podcast, there's a partnership. Another publishing company that obviously is one of our competitors launched with Book Riots, and a few other ones launched with I can't think of them off the top of my head, but we were just wondering if that was an option for us as well.
Yeah, I mean, also partnerships mean many different things too. So it could just be that you find someone to, pay a little money to promote you on their podcast, and that's considered a partnership. So, so I mean, there are all sorts of creative ways to partner. It's definitely not like a science, and
right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Allison, and I am a bootstrapping podcaster coming to you from my closet very often. And we're hearing lots of stories about like WNYCs looking for ideas in-house and from the people who are already doing it. But it's sounding like a lot more fun to join you guys. So I'm wondering if you have any tips on pitching or how to present yourself to break through. And those of us on the outside with good ideas, how can we join you?
just before you answer, there is a pitching session at 3:45 with Jenna, I think,
I'll
right
be there.
here. So
Excellent.
you can
We're gonna
pitch
watch
her
it, for
then
sure.
as
You
well.
already had to apply to get into it, so
Oh,
I'm talking
really?
about- yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
They sent out an email, and I think they only took like 5 pitches or something like that. So.
Oh, okay. But you can probably sit there. Well, yeah, I mean...
Well, I'll go home and send you an email later, but how do I cut through?
Well,
or
so-
what do you like to see, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, here's a thing that when you're pitching a show, you really should know what that company does. We get a lot of pitches that are just like not anything we would ever do. And you guys probably, I mean, like, you know, I think every company kind of has a different thing that they're doing. A lot of what we're doing now is kind of like in 2018 is going to be a lot of like 6 to 10 part, like very deeply reported kind of documentaries and some fiction. So that's kind of what we're looking for. If you want to pitch a weekly show, Gimlet might be a good place. Panoply, mid-roll. So just really like research the place you're pitching, because I get kind of annoyed when I get things that are like, why would I ever do that?
Right. I think, you want to prove basically that like you're willing to do your homework so that the company therefore is also wanting to make a similar investment. I mean, we get people that mail us rocks and they're like, this is a story. Here's where I found them. Like,
it's amazing what people think is a story.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time. I wanted to
thank
say one more thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, please. Let's take one more, and then we
Okay.
can wrap with that.
Yes.
Sorry, guys, we're getting pushed off. One last question.
we're around. I'm around though, and we're all around if you want to talk more.
Hi, my name is Amber J. Phillips. I'm also known as the High Priestess of Black Joy. I host a podcast, it's true. I host a podcast called the Black Joy Mixtape with Jazz the KOS, the King of the South. And one of the things I noticed is that where I'm based in DC, and there are so many Black folks, queer people, people of color, who have been exposed to our little baby podcast through getting very lucky, ending up on the Breakfast Club and Black media platforms. But I'm also I'm so grateful for this conference, because we don't know any of this. Like, we don't know the deals or these different pieces, and hearing what our listeners need to be up to in order to get sponsorships. But the sponsorships will help us to have more resources to put out better content and to get production quality up. So my question is, how are you all investing in, specifically, because we know a lot of, by the look of the room, no tea, no shade, but getting more people of color to be listeners. And I find a lot of joy in actually teaching Black folks in Ohio how that there's a podcast app on their iPhone. But I wanted to know how you all are investing or doing the work of finding these gems of people of color podcasters that might be recording in their living rooms, to get them up to the 10K listeners, to get them more access to all the things that you are talking about here today.
I mean, I can say from Science Fridays, that's super important that you're thinking about that. I think a lot of people here are thinking about stuff like that. From Science Fridays perspective, where we have an opportunity is obviously with sourcing our guests. We made a commitment a couple years ago to make sure that 50% of the guests that we have on the Science Friday program are women. And that is true to this day. So from there, it's now trying to take a step to make sure that we're sourcing diverse guests as a part of our program. And we're working our damnedest to make sure that that is something that we're doing. The hard part for us as a science program is that, unfortunately, there isn't a ton of diversity in science.
There's trap science on YouTube.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, trying to basically it's something that we're aware of, and basically we're always looking to make sure that we have diversity amongst our guests. And we've only launched one podcast, so I can't speak to other networks.
Yeah, well, we've launched a bunch, and I'm excited to say that I think every single one of our podcasts is hosted either by people of color, queer people, or women. I don't think we have any straight male, straight white male hosts. I mean, and that's always been really important to me. And when it comes to money too, I don't want to be super crass about it, but when I was in public radio, there was this idea that we do this because of the mission. We need to have diversity because of the mission. And it just felt just felt like no one really like understood it, and there were these like weird ways that people of color were supposed to be represented, like either as sort of like civil rights heroes or like ex-drug addicts, and I found it offensive, frankly. There wasn't much space for nuance, and and then when I went to BuzzFeed, we started another round, and a thing that money-wise, like a show like Another Round immediately, or not immediately, but quickly got a ton of listeners. And I think it's really short-sighted if people are just making podcasts for like existing audiences. I think if you really like, if you want to do cool stuff and if you want to make money in the space, frankly, like you have to look at audiences who haven't had enough content made for them, and you have to figure out how to make that content. And there are still a lot of groups that are pretty, missed by podcasts, and I think we should all be making content for people who don't have much content made for them.
I know we didn't, yeah. Thank you again for being part of this panel. You guys are awesome. And I know we didn't get to all of your questions, so how can people reach you?
Yeah, I'm just going to give you my email address. Anybody here is welcome to email me. It's pretty easy. It's Danielle@sciencefriday.com. So come and find me afterwards or shoot me a message and I'll get back to you so we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, same here. You might have to email me like 2 or 3 times, but it's a crazy time right now. But I'm Jenna@pineapple.fm. Pretty easy to reach. And one last thing I wanted to say is that, again, it's hard to make money off of your podcast. And I think a way to think of some of this is that it's great to host your own show. If you also have the production skills, it's just so marketable right now. And if you can have like your own show that you're hosting, but then you're making money by putting together, shows for maybe brands or other people, I think that's a good way to go right now. And you can do really well in this field. So I'm glad you're all here. Thanks for coming.
Coming up next is Make Your Ads as Good as Your Shows with Nazanin Rafsanjani, creative director at Gimlet. So don't go anywhere. Thanks again, guys.